This is the Balanced Growth Show with Dr. Travis Perry, helping successful business professionals like you achieve balance in their lives.
Welcome to another episode of the Balanced Growth Show. I'm your host, as always, Dr. Travis Perry. Today, we have Nina Nesdoly. She is a speaker, researcher, and expert on the neuroscience of work-life balance, stress, and burnout prevention. She leverages her background in neuroscience and management to help people and organizations build better work-life balance. Nina is currently pursuing her Ph.D. study, work-related stress, and her TEDx talk, How to Relieve Stress When You're Overwhelmed, which was selected as an editor's pick by TED. Welcome, Nina, to the show.
Hi, Travis. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So fun to get to catch up with you in the pre-show and talk to you about what you're doing and your research. It's so fun to have another research nerd brain in the house who gets what we're talking about here, and really excited to have you. We have to, right? It's just part of it. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got to this place? You know, you've been in the neuroscience field, the management field, and now you're doing a PhD, really focused on stress and overwhelms and burnout. So let's have you kind of catch us up. Tell us your background here.
So there's two parts to this. There's the academic trajectory and then also my personal interest in these topics. So speaking academically, I did my bachelor's in neuroscience and mental health, went to pivot into management research in my master's. I was actually at a point with neuroscience where every single course in my undergrad, we started with talking about stress and how that connected to everything else. So by the time I finished my bachelor's in neuroscience, I was like, I never want to talk about stress ever again. I've had enough of that. Went into my master's in management and quickly discovered that there was so much that we knew in neuroscience about stress, well-being, burnout prevention that could help people with work-life balance that wasn't being used in the organizational behavior management literature. So that became really my focus, is branching these fields together, taking things that we know from neuroscience and applying it to what we know about the workplace and how people experience stress at work. In my master's, I looked at how leaders impact the way that employees experience stress. Not a ton of the neuroscience in there because it was a COVID master's, so we stuck to surveys. But carrying on into my PhD, my work is heavily informed by the neuroscience literature and looking at how we can bring that into our theory, our practice, and our research around stress at work. On the personal side, I had my own experience with really overextending myself. In 2016, my dad was diagnosed with leukemia. And for the semester following that, I was great about dropping some courses, taking it easy, spending time with him in the hospital. But when he went into remission, I decided I had to make up for lost time. And I loaded my life up, got approval for a course overload in my program, full hours at work, volunteer projects, everything I could think of. I was burnt out, I was tired, I was sick, and I collapsed and hit my head in a yoga class. That still was not when I slowed down. I got through the concussion assessment at the hospital because I used to be a junior national team athlete. I was a cyclist, and part of my training was to stand on an exercise ball and do squats. So when the concussion assessment was balance exercises, I had it down. I just had muscle memory to go on, made it through that assessment, continued to go to work, school, volunteer for a month until I eventually blacked out again and was taken back to the hospital, at which point the specialist is saying, you know this, you're in a neuroscience degree. How could you let it get this bad? But I so heavily prioritized my need for achievement over my own well-being. Yeah. So that really spurred a huge personal interest in looking at how I could take care of myself and prioritize my well-being while still pursuing the goals academically and career-wise that mattered to me. And fortunately for me, I was studying neuroscience at the time, so I was able to turn to the literature to start to sort that out for myself.
You've got this academic background and this personal experience, which, full disclosure, Nina and I have been part of a cohort at a speaker training called Heroic Public Speaking, which I've had, the founder on one of our podcasts, Michael Port, and we've talked about that experience. But Nina, I've heard a little bit of this story, but I've never put these two together. That here you are, you're working on this as the researcher, and yet you experience this. Why is this then so important to you? Why is this field of work-related stress and balance and burnout, why is this so important for you to get the information that you've been researching to leaders out there, business leaders and quite honestly, non-academic minds out that maybe don't understand a lot of what you've been researching about?
What I've learned through my experience and through the research is that when we prioritize well-being, when we prioritize work-life balance, everything starts to come together in our career and in other areas that we're focused on, be it education, relationships, other things. When we lead with our well-being, everything else gets easier. And I think our culture, our very hustle culture, comes in at this angle of, we just need to work harder and do more and push ourselves more. My personal experience and the research says the opposite. It says that you will find more joy, more meaning, and more success in your life when you are approaching your goals with this orientation of, how am I going to prioritize my well-being first? How do I matter? How am I going to take care of me? And then how am I going to get the work done in a way that aligns with that?
Yeah. And, I think this is where we have a lot of overlap. I've studied priorities and values and goals a lot in the research I've done and, the books that we've been producing to help get the message out there. But priorities, prioritizing, most people will tell me when I ask them what are their highest priorities, they will tell me their health. They will tell me their spirituality. They will tell me, their family and everything. If they get really serious about this, yet they're prioritizing work first most of the time. Mm-hmm. And they're doing, family second a lot of the time, and their own health, spiritual and physical last. It kind of gets left over. Why do you think that is? You've read my book, you understand the concepts, you've got some research on, if you just put your priorities first, it makes sense. But why do we do this as humans? Let's break down some of the neuroscience behind this.
I like that you asked that as humans, because it really does go back so far in our history too. I think about, I went to this museum exhibit in Montreal over the summer that was on ancient Egypt. And I had such a good laugh at some of the records they had. This record keeping about employees. This guy had written down the excuses, I'm using air quotes here, that employees had given for not going to work that day. This is ancient Egyptian civilization. So this is before our civilization. People are doing the same things, making it all about time at work. So this is somehow very ingrained in us. And I think a lot of it has to do with the external recognition that comes with it. The fact that achieving work-related goals, career objectives is very visible to other people. As a species, we like to be perceived positively by others. We want to be included in the in-group. We want people to see that we can succeed, provide, accomplish. And our society really reinforces that and wraps us up in this where we've always got to be doing more, especially in Northern cultures. So I think it's a combination of, part of this is a little bit innately human, where we like to do things that other people can see that we're doing, and we like the recognition and the reward that comes with it. And then we also, in North America, live in a culture that is really heavily leaned this way, where there's very clear messages that your value is connected to your productivity and the work that you're doing and the career that you have. So it becomes one thing to say, my health matters to me, but when everything around you and everything that has become really ingrained in your belief system is saying to you, producing at work is what matters most and will make you valuable, of course you're going to want to put that first and let that visit to the gym slip.
You bring up some really good points. That's fascinating to hear that, early Egyptian times were giving similar excuses. But that blows my mind, right? That's the kind of the anthropology, maybe even the sociology brain of mine that, I studied in my bachelor's degree of like, wow, society really hasn't changed that much. We've changed, we've advanced, we have technology, but yeah, if we put this into context as far as a timeline, we're still struggling with some of the same issues. And then we look at the culture and our North American, capitalistic culture of we're driven by what it is we accomplish at work. But it's so paradoxical to what I'm hearing from people that no, that's not really as important as these other things. So I appreciate you, breaking that down a little bit. I know you speak. You have a TEDx talk, that was selected by the editor's pick, which is awesome. And you've done a great job. And I've seen you speak, and you're eloquent in your speech, and you do some fantastic work. As you're working with these companies, what are you seeing with leaders, with business leaders? What do you think that they're struggling with the most when it comes to burnout and stress and balance?
So what I see with leaders is, and we see this in the research too, actually, leadership and middle management has higher rates of stress and burnout than the frontline employees often. Not in every field. If you look at a field like healthcare, it's a little bit more distributed across it. But leaders are dealing with this combination of responsibilities for themselves and for their teams. The biggest thing I see leaders going through is this sense of being torn, where they feel like they need to do things to help themselves, but they also feel like they need to do things to help their team. And it kind of keeps them a little bit stuck in the middle, where now they're not doing anything that's good for anybody. They have priorities being put on them from above. They're pushing those down to their team. They're trying to take care of themselves, but they don't want to abandon their team by taking care of themselves. So then ironically, they're more burnt out and exhausted and less able to support their team. And it just becomes this big vicious circle.
I sat next to a guy, interestingly enough, on my last trip back from heroic public speaking. And I was, doing some training about speaking, about balance. And I'm talking to him, and he has a very similar experience where he's middle management. He's not a business owner. And I typically have done research with business owners, and I know where they're struggling, right? Because they're the business owner. They have a totally different issues and struggles. But these middle managers and leaders that don't own the firm, or they are maybe C-suite level and middle, to middle management, they struggle with exactly what you just said. It's like they're wanting to protect he said, like, I want to protect my people. Mm-hmm. And he's like, they're like my children, like, and he's a dad, he has several children. He's like, I want to protect them so that they can have a great work-life balance. I'm like, what about you? And he's like, kind of take it for the team. I'm like, very, very interesting.
It's interesting. And it's, the companies where managers are doing really problematic things, those hit the media and those get a lot of attention. But in my experience, most managers are well-intentioned people. And we see the same thing in the research, what we call abusive supervision. I was just reading a review paper the other day saying, statistically, this isn't actually as big of a problem in terms of how many people are like this. It feels like a huge problem because when it happens, it's horrible. But most managers fall somewhere on the spectrum of either, not really being that concerned, but kind of being neutral on well-being, or really wanting this for their team and really wanting the best for their team and wanting to protect them. And I think you articulated it great there when you said, it's different for the middle managers versus the people who own the business. For the people who own the business, what I see is more that they know that if they stop, the business stops. And that's really scary for them. But then for the middle managers, yeah, it's this, there's pressures coming from on high, there's pressures they have to put down, and this conflict of, I need to take care of myself, I need to take care of my team, and then believing that those are two separate things.
As you're going around speaking and consulting, what do you suggest for middle management, especially, of how to cultivate a culture of balance in their firms, their companies? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So ultimately, it starts with the leader and what they're doing. Leaders have such a massive impact on their employees. There was a fantastic study published by UKG earlier this year, which found that the impact that leaders have on employee mental health is equivalent to spouses and higher than doctors. Now, I like to joke sometimes that that's because nobody has a family doctor, because they don't where I live. But even so, we see that the impact of leaders is monumental. And we spend so much time with our leaders, right? If you're an employee, if you're a middle manager, you have a leader that you report to. We spend so many hours in contact with these people, setting goals with them, working with them, trying to navigate our lives in a way with them, because work is an important part of many of our lives. So we look at this, what the impact that these leaders have, then modeling behaviors becomes incredibly important. What a leader is doing for themselves, what they model, matters more than what they say to the team. If a leader is saying, yeah, don't worry about it, you don't have to check your emails that I sent you at 3 a.m. or on the weekend, that pressure is still there. We feel a lot of pressure around things like emails. Saying take your weekends, take your vacation days, prioritize your well-being, but never doing it, the leader is setting the tone for what the culture is going to look like. So first and foremost, it's that leaders who are, this is why I said earlier, leaders are viewing it as a conflict between protecting their teams and themselves, but that's a false belief. It's not a dichotomy here. It's that when you do things to prioritize your own well-being, you reinforce to your team that that's appropriate and that that's a priority, and they are going to feel more confident doing that for themselves.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it. In parenting, I come from the social science field and the psychology field, but in parenting, they talk about modeling behaviors a ton. It's really important to have a strong attachment with a parental figure, and then that modeling behavior. And in our household, we have this term: inspire, not require. So if you want to do something, if you want your children to do something, you better be the one doing it. In fact, my kids, I'm going to call grandma out. Grandma was hanging out with them while I was at the hospital with my wife. She was having the baby, and I came back home, and they were saying, yeah, grandma, she says not to speed and go over bumps, really fast, but she does it. And then when she pulled into the driveway, she said, don't do what I do what I say.
And that never works.
It does not work.
Never works.
And the funny part was, I didn't call her out. My kids called her out. They're like, "Ma." Yeah. It's just funny because they know the difference. And I think employees, and I like to look at systems, family systems, business systems, they come from very similar root. And I look at this going, well, yeah, if you're the business leader, you're like a parent in a family. And you can't expect your kids who are learning to do what you tell them to do, but you're not showing the example. So I absolutely believe that it is a top-down approach. Top-down approach works best, but obviously there's got to be buy-in. So what you've got a leader, let's say they are modeling this good behavior. How can that leader, if they're listening, business leader, a firm owner, et cetera, C-suite employee, middle management, whatever your position is, how do they now get buy-in from the rest of the firm to change the culture if the culture, has some toxicity in it?
Oh, changing the culture within a whole firm? Ooh. So this, I find a big variable here becomes the size of a team. When you have a team that's less than about 50 people, the leadership team, like the executive team, is going to be quite small and has a really strong influence on the culture as a whole. As soon as you start to get bigger, you end up with this structure that's more like subcultures within the team, or within the company, I should say. So you end up with these groups where it's like this team of 40 is thriving. And then over here, you've got this team of 60 that is burnt out and exhausted. And it will feel like two entirely different organizations. So in terms of getting buy-in for this culture and helping it spread within the organization, I think the best that leaders can do is really just to continue to prioritize well-being within their own team and demonstrate when they are in meetings, when they are reporting back for the productivity of the team, the earnings, whatever the targets are that they were meeting, to communicate what's going on their team that has contributed to that success. And if that is including practices that support employee well-being, letting upper management know and looking to encourage that within other parts of the business. It's a difficult shift to make when we see things like the 4-day work week is a really good practical example, but it's hard for people to wrap their heads around the idea that sometimes less is more. And especially with knowledge work and the kind of jobs that we have today, that's very much the case. When people are tired, when people are stressed and overwhelmed, and especially burnt out, it changes how the brain functions. So if you are stressed, your body is not prioritizing higher order cognitive functions. It's prioritizing survival processes. It's going to be harder to focus, to pay attention, to get things done. If you're skipping things like sleep, having a deficit of just a couple hours of sleep a night is experienced in the body like a massive life stressor. It makes everything more difficult. If you're not exercising, you're not getting the endorphins, the proteins that help to repair your brain that you can access through that, and you're losing out on that, that 1 hour in the gym, you feel like, oh, I could have spent it working. No, not really. That hour in the gym makes you so much better at your work that it cancels out pretty easily. But it's a hard shift to wrap our head around because we come from this culture of more is more. Less is often more. And so this is where we see things that are so successful, like these studies coming out around the 4-day work week that are showing it's working. We take this small temporary bump where, okay, we now have a day a week where we're not doing work, and there is a little adjustment there. But companies are able to very quickly get past that to a point where the productivity comes back and then goes up. And so for leaders who want to change their cultures, it's to say things like, hey, one of the things I've been doing this quarter, I know you're really excited about our numbers, but one of the things I've been doing this quarter that I want to let you know about is enforcing vacation days, saying, no, these aren't just on the table, you're going to take them. Or one of the things that we've been doing as a team is having a hard stop at 5 p.m. We're not doing emails in the evening. I know you're really excited about the numbers, but I want you to know how we got here and what it's looking like for our people. And now our people are excited to stay. So our numbers are going to be even better because they're engaged, they're productive, they're happy, and we'll have less turnover.
Nice. No, these are very real takeaways that I know you speak a lot about this. You're a professional speaker. You're all over the place. How can people reach out to you if they want to know more about this, Nina? Because I think this is fascinating. We can continue talking about this for another hour easy. And I know we've got places to go, but what's the best way? How can they reach you?
So you can find me on social medias, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, using my name, Nina Nesdoly. For speaking, you can find me at ninanesdoly.com. And for workshops and consulting services for businesses, my company is Workplace Clarity. You can find that at workplaceclarity.com.
Nice. Thank you so much for helping to spread the message. Less is more. I can't agree with you. More on this topic. Prioritize, not just, know your priorities, but actually prioritize your time to work on yourself, your health, the things that matter the most to you. And it's crazy because the research that I've seen is on the other side. When people do this, especially business leaders, because they have time freedom, which is sometimes a time trap. When they do that, they actually are more productive. They are more able to work. And so this is this dichotomy of like, well, I've got to work more. No, actually, you should be working less, but working on the things that matter most so that you can make time for those things that really are highest priority. Thank you for your time today, Nina. Again, any last thing that you would suggest, something, you would leave the audience with that's really been burning that you would like to add to this conversation?
I'll just give one little tip for shifting this dynamic between always doing more to doing a little bit less. The next time you catch yourself thinking, I don't have time for the gym, I have to finish this report before I can eat dinner with my family, whatever it is, you are holding your life and your health and your well-being hostage against your productivity. The next time you do that, that's your cue to stop working and go do whatever that thing is that's going to be good for you. The work's going to get done.
Nice. Great tip. Thank you for being here again and for all of the work that you're doing to help people be more balanced in their leadership.
Thanks so much, Travis.
Absolutely. If you've liked this, share, subscribe, send this to someone who needs to hear a little bit about how culture can be completely transformed, top-down leadership approach. And, until next time, remember, live life on purpose.